I'm officially not a captain anymore. It's been since 2010 since I got out of the business, actually. I guided for 6 years. I've been fishing this area for going on almost 28 years now. So I've kind of learned the area, know the area very well. And I guess I want to talk a little bit about, I guess, big trout with the cold weather. Actually, this time of year is my favorite time of year to fish. And people think I'm nuts for saying that, but I consistently would catch more or have more 100-fish days in this time of year than I would any other time of the year, except for during usually summertime with the snook on the spawn. They literally were so stupid that I literally caught snook with a bare hook. They were, I mean, literally all around my boat, and literally were dipping bare hooks to the snook. But other than that, this time of year is my favorite because what it does is it concentrates the fish in certain areas. For instance, Fort DeSoto is one of my favorite big trout areas. We had in February, early March, we had days that we would find the potholes, and this is not out at Tarpon Key. This is actually inside Fort DeSoto itself. You find these deep potholes, and it's like shooting fish in a barrel. Especially if you get there before the negative tide rolls in, if you can get in there and station yourself in these potholes. And the thing that I look for was mullet. If there was mullet in these potholes, then the fish are in there too. So we would stage up, and literally we had one trip where we caught 120 trout between 19 and 26 inches. Just one right after the other, as fast as you could throw the bait in the water, it was fish on. Out at Tarpon Key, there's some premium potholes around that island that are away from the island that actually hold a lot of big trout. My biggest trout personally has come just outside of Cockroach on a Zoom Super Fluke. This was god-awful. I was in my early 20s. It was a Zoom Super Fluke, and it was 36 inches long. Biggest trout to this day that I've still caught. I've caught a few over 30 inches, but that one by far was my biggest. It was just south of Piney Point. Not Piney Point, I'm sorry. It was just south of Beacon's Pass on the flats and some of the potholes out there. But during this time of year, these fish get in these backcountry areas and they get into these deeper potholes. So if you can find the mullet in the deeper, any activity, pretty much, any activity, if there's birds diving on little bait, if there's birds wading around, that's the first thing that I look for when I go onto a flat, is activity. If I don't see activity, I don't even stop there. I just keep going. Because if there's no activity, there's usually no fish there. I've learned that lesson the hard way a few times, and I've learned by looking at the situation when I'm out on the water saying, okay, we've got birds, we've got mullet, we've got something going on. There has to be something going on that flat for me to even stop and fish it. But the main thing during this time of year, like I said, is the potholes. Finding the potholes that are deeper. Now, I looked at the tides for that day, for the big trout tournament day. You have an outgoing tide, at least at Point Pinellas, to 9:34, I think it was. It was a .40. So it's not a negative tide, but it's low enough to put these fish into certain areas. And if you can find the fish located in those certain areas, you're going to catch them. The trout, if the tide comes up, they really like the shallow water. The big trout. Now, you can go out and catch 15, 16 inches, and sometimes that wins the tournament. I think I fished the tournament, the longest trout tournament one time, and I think 17 inches won it. And then another time, 28 inches won it. So it's just a matter of, taking the picture and making sure that you do what you need to do to win. I think you were saying that somebody won with a little itty-bitty trout at the Ernest Graham, so you never know. So if you don't feel comfortable, just take the picture, because you never know what's going to happen. The main bait that I use for really big trout, and we were consistently in the Cockroach Bay area during this time of year, we consistently, until last year, which is really weird, I don't know what's going on, and I haven't caught a big trout. I've caught 2 big trout this year. One was 26 and one was 24 inches. I don't know what's going on, but my favorite bait, of course, is the white bait. the live bait. The big trout just cannot resist the white bait. But my favorite artificial by far is the Zoom Super Fluke with no weight, just weedless, and working it through the water column and finding what can't think of the word. Just lost my name. Yeah, the way you work it. If you're working it through the water, just a couple of jerks here and then let it pause, or a couple jerks, jerk, and then pause, or just a jerk and a pause. What I like to do when I'm using artificials is find the opportunity to where these fish are going to eat. If they like it on that one jerk and pause, then you found their pattern. That's what they're going to eat. If you find it jerk, pause, or whatever the case may be, if you find the pattern, that's what you want to concentrate on. If it's a certain type of color, and everybody has a confidence bait. My confidence bait are minnow type baits, Zoom Super Flukes, jigs. My non-confidence baits are spoons. Can't stand a spoon. Cannot stand a spoon. But that's just me. I mean, we were in an instance where we were catching fish after fish after fish, and I said, okay, I'm throwing a spoon. Threw out a spoon 50 times, didn't catch a single fish. My buddy who was with me grabbed the rod and said, let me show you how it's done. Threw one time, boom, caught a fish. I'm like, but it's here. It's how I work the bait. It all comes down to your confidence. If you don't have confidence in a certain, don't throw it. Just don't. Find another bait that they're going to eat. And I found that the bigger trout, of course, you probably all heard this, but they have very keen eyesight. They're very weary of their surroundings, especially those real big ones, on what they want to eat. The second biggest trout I ever caught was 8 pounds, and it was literally in the middle of the channel, just on, if you're coming into Cockroach and you go past the boat ramp, it was in the middle of the channel. Yes. Yeah, and then I caught a 40-inch redfish just after that. That was the first time I ever used whitebait in my entire life. I was with somebody that kind of had an idea of what they were doing. But we were fishing in the middle of that channel, running back to the back country back there. Never happened again, of course. But the trout, they transition. I don't think they're going to transition with all these cold fronts coming in, unless it warms up really, really, really quick. Within the time frame of next week to the trout tournament, I see them back still in the deep potholes on the low tides. Like I said, when that tide comes up, though, they sit in the real skinny water, so they get real skittish and they're harder to catch. I just found that we've literally caught trout in water this deep on corked baits. Big trout. We've watched them come right off. They've come off the edge of the flat into the pothole to eat the bait. But they were sitting in the grass just waiting to ambush. And of course, most fish are ambush type of hunters. But trout, for some reason, seem to be... Everybody says, oh, trout are easy to catch. Yeah, the 12 to 15, 16-inch fish, relatively easy to catch. But those big ones, for this tournament... They're a different animal. They're just a completely different animal. And I found that when you're fishing the potholes, depending on what the tide's doing, if it's still going out, those fish will be towards the middle of the pothole. Now, if you have a tide that is done going out and then it's coming in, those fish will start to tend to hug the edges of the pothole. So concentrate on working the edges of the pothole if you've got an incoming tide, which you will after about... If you're fishing the Fort DeSoto area, that incoming tide will start around 8:30 or so. If you're fishing here or even farther north, it's going to be a lot later. I would recommend, to be completely honest, I would recommend anything from here down to the mouth of the Big Manatee River, and then of course Fort DeSoto. Fort DeSoto for us is almost like Dunedin is for the Anclote area. Up there, you get those spoil islands that those fish hang off the drop-offs and things like that. And I haven't heard really any reports of a lot of big trout being caught at all. I've been gone for a month at boat shows, but have you, Tiger? I mean, I haven't Has anybody heard of any really big trout being consistently caught?
I was out at Fort DeSoto last weekend on kayaks, my wife and I, and there's a hole that a lot of wade fishers will circle. You probably know where it is. I caught 21-inch trout there. That was the only one I saw anybody catch.
Really? And that used to be...
And that was on shrimp, live shrimp.
Yeah.
And I started using artificial, top water, mid-level.
And that hole is usually...
It's low.
Yeah.
It's low. And it may not be big, but it's got trout in it.
Right.
Nothing.
Yeah. And see, I don't know what's going on. It's been weird. The last 2 years have been really weird in Tampa Bay, at least for us, where we would consistently go out and catch, 19 to 24-inch trout and not even blink an eye. But the last 2 years have been really weird in the sense of they don't seem to be abundant. We'll catch one here or there, but there was times that we literally would turn around, throw this way, catch redfish and snook, and then turn around, throw out this way, and catch a 20-inch trout. But the last 2 years, it's not been like that. I don't know what's going on. I don't know if they've moved different locations. I mean, there's a lot of, let's say if you're coming into Fort DeSoto by the Skyway, and you take a left towards where Tarpon Key is in that, and if you keep going straight, on the right-hand side, there's a lot of potholes in that area. That consistently holds trout, usually, during this time of year. I mean, it's almost a given that those trout...
It's close to where we
Yeah. And then, of course, everybody mostly knows where the maintenance hole is, which is farther up before you get to the bridge. It's on the left-hand side. That is a very well-known wading spot. If it's a negative tide, it's hard to get to, but it won't be a negative tide. But that was a spot you could go and catch 20, 24-inch trout and not blink an eye. But I just haven't heard either from Anclote or from here.
There are, just for the past maybe 3 months, just the canals throughout Apollo Beach, the quieter canals.
Yeah.
They're there.
Yeah.
In the middle of the canal.
And I think the cold snaps that have happened recently, because when I left, I fished on New Year's Day and it was like 80-something degrees. And we were in shorts and I was catching bait on the flats. I mean, that's the first time I've ever caught bait on the flats in January, much less December. So I think these fish are a little confused. And I think now they're setting back into their winter patterns. And that's one thing, like you said, they're in those canals and stuff. And then those fish, I haven't fished in a month. So my fish that have not been there may be there now. So it's just a matter of going out and checking it and looking. And I don't know what the water quality is like, but usually during this time of year, it's very, very, very clear. So you can literally go into some of these potholes and literally just drive through and look and see the trout scatter. And just turn around and come back and just anchor down and give it a couple of minutes, because every fish is the same way. I've done it so many times where if we're looking for fish and you drive through an area and the fish are there and they scatter and you think, oh, I just blew out the hole, just go back and sit for a little bit, because those fish are going to come right back into that hole. It happens every single time I do it. No matter what fish it is, redfish, snook, trout, I've had them just literally spread out from the boat. I've come back, anchored up, sat there for about 10 to 15 minutes and waited for them, and then they come right back. And sometimes you can literally see them coming back into the hole. But like I said, my favorite are they allowed to throw live bait in it?
Yes.
Okay. If you're going to go catch bait, depending on what the weather's like, if it's warmed up by then, the bait may be on the flats. But I think with this El Nino, it's not going to be. It's always at the Skyway, no matter what anybody wants to tell you. If you want to take the time to catch bait, it's at the Skyway. I've caught bait at the Skyway in 49-degree water. There's been twice in the years that I've been fishing here that I've not caught bait at the Skyway during the wintertime. One was when we had the really, really, really bad fronts. I think it was my last season, 2010. Where I found there was one day that I did not catch bait at the Skyway. Never marked a piece of bait, nothing. Other than that, the bait is always there. If you want to work for it, and sometimes it's well worth it to catch those big trout. If you go there and you mark bait on the bottom, chum it up. I use Purina tropical fish food. I just mix it with water. I don't use menhaden. I don't use jack mackerel. I've gotten away from that. But the thing is, I'm going to give a tip that I usually don't give out too much, even to this day, because it works so well for me. If you're at the Skyway, and you've probably been there, you've seen it, if the tide's ripping, if it's ripping in or out, if it's ripping, a lot of guys will be out and throwing into the stall and letting their nets go into the stall, and you don't see a lot of them catch a lot of bait like that. What's happening is the bait is tight, but as soon as you throw the net, they'll just spread out and move. Even if you're chumming, that chum is just going so far away that those bait fish may be chummed up 30 feet from you, and there's no chance that you're going to get the bait. One key thing that I have found when the tide's ripping is that between both piers, you get the pilings that are crossed like this. If you get into those pilings, what happens is it creates an eddy between both the piers. And if you can get your back of the boat into that eddy, you drop the chum, and the chum actually goes straight down. And those bait fish will come straight up from the bottom. And what's happening is you're not having that ripping tide. So when you throw the net literally goes straight down like this. And I cannot tell you how many times I've done that. I've gone to the Skyway and watched. You're recording this, aren't you? Mm-hmm. I've taught quite a few people this. I try to teach them, and I go out and I see them doing the same thing that they're usually doing. But if you get in between those piers, and it's any time of year really. If you get in between those piers, and he'll vouch for me that we've been out there and literally the boats are everywhere, just throwing and throwing and throwing. Nobody's catching anything. And we will pull up, I'll put the back of the boat against the piling and literally just sit there and chum. And those bait fish will come up from the bottom. I'll throw the net once or twice and have so much bait that, and everybody else is watching us going, they've been there way before we ever got there. The other key is, the other trick, which I did share this on my YouTube channel, is if you're in the situation, if you're at the markers or if you're at the bridge, is that if you have no tidal movement, what happens is that bait spreads out. And it's very hard to get it concentrated into an area. When the tide's ripping, it's very hard to chum and then get them up and then throw the net and make sure the net doesn't go into the bridge or into the shipping channel markers. If the tide is dead, if your anchor can do it, put the boat in reverse. What it does is it creates a false current when you're out there, and it literally, you chum into the current, and it brings the bait fish up because they're thinking that this is the current, and then they get, I've got it all on me. If you go to our YouTube channel, Tampa Bay Fishing Channel, there's a video, and I cannot remember which one. I've got like 70 videos on there, but there's one that shows you exactly what we're doing. And then I do have one that
day when we were filming that video, and you guys listen to this guy, he can catch bait in the sewer.
Yeah.
I'm telling you.
But you were there for the back of the back, and we were throwing a 1/4-inch net that day at the Skyway, and I was catching them. And you know how slow a 1/4-inch net sinks. But at when you have a slack tide and you create that false current, what happens is they come up when you chum in that current, and they come right up into it, and you just throw your net, and at that point your net's going to go straight down because there's no current outside of the currents that's being created by the motor. But if you have an anchor that will hold, that has been a huge lifesaver, and I did a video on it. But I literally, people are like, some guides would come up, and I would do it at the Skyway all the time. And they're like, how in the world did you stay in there? If I had the wind going one way and the tide going the other way, which is a flipping nightmare, I'll do the same thing. I'll keep the boat in reverse to keep the boat in a steady position so I can continue to chum in the same spot. So keeping that, if your anchor can hold you when you're in reverse, and I'm not talking like reverse, just go into gear, into reverse, and keep the boat. And sometimes I have to turn the motor certain ways to get the current to flow where I want it to. And literally, we'll get that current flowing, and then I'll just drop the chum right in the current, and it pushes it out, and that bait fish will come right up. It's a unique thing that I found kind of by accident, really. I was trying to keep the boat in a position, and it worked out well. And from that point on, then I knew I had something.
Are you throwing behind the boat?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm always, when I'm in
the
deep...
engine's basically pushing it forward of the boat and then it comes back?
Yeah, sometimes it depends on the circumstance, because sometimes I'll have a situation where I'll have a slower tide. Let's say it's moving in. Let's say the structure is here. If it's a shipping channel, the tide's coming in and the wind's coming across this way. Well, if the tide is too slow, what happens is it starts to push me out. And it's the most frustrating thing in the world to try to get set up in the position. Well, once we put the boat in reverse, it keeps us in that position. And once I find where I need to have that wheel turn, if I have to cock the motor this way or if I have to cock it this way, whatever the position is I'll be able to keep that boat in a straight position. So now I'm chumming just a little bit away from the boat, so it pushes it out, but then the tide picks it up and takes it right in. So there's a lot of different circumstances that you can use to make that situation work. Like I said again, if your anchor can hold you, then it's a good idea if you're out trying to catch bait. And as Tiger said about life jackets, I've been in the water three times. Once by myself, once with and then twice with a buddy. One was on your boat, wasn't it?
Fell off my boat.
Yeah, fell off your boat. And the one time I did by myself, it was completely calm. Flat as a glass. I was catching bait. I had a TV show at one time, and I was catching bait to go film the show. Anyway, I was out at the Skyway, and I was picking up the anchor. And the tide was ripping. I was picking up the anchor. My back was to the bridge, and my boat had swung, and it hit the bridge. And when I went over, luckily, the boat that I used to have had pole holders on it, push pole. When I went over, I was able to grab one. Because if I didn't grab that boat would have been gone like that because the tide was absolutely ripping. So I was there, no life vest, no nothing, so I tried to push myself up in the boat, and that was a no-go for me. Tried it again, still a no-go. So then the boat's starting to go away from the bridge a little bit, or underneath the bridge, away from the bridge. So I literally, I pushed the boat, swam the boat, and stuck my motor in between some of the pilings. And so I was able to stop my boat, and I thought, I don't have a ladder, how am I going to get in this boat? But then I thought, my trim tabs. So I moved myself to the back of the boat, got on my trim tab, got on my motor, and was able to get in the boat. But I'll tell you what, that was the scariest moment that I've ever had in my life. And I literally, for a second in my life, because there was nobody on the bridge fishing that day. Nobody. And if that boat would have gotten away from me, I would have been screwed. No life vest, I would have tried to swim in the tide, there's no way. 2 other times, I was with him. Luckily, I was able to get back, and I still held on to the cast net. And the other time it was real rough, and I was on somebody else's boat, and I went over and was able to get back in the boat. But you never know when it's going to happen. I've been out in 30 miles. I've been out in winds like it's blowing right now, and you guys saw how rough it is out there. Stupid me trying to go to the bridge to catch bait for a charter that I would take back in the river. I wouldn't take my clients out in this, of course. But you never know what's going to happen. I never had a problem except for when it was one time when it was rough, but the other 2 times it was calm as could be. So always at least have your life jackets in the boat, or I used to wear the one that goes around the waist. If you're going to wear it like that, don't get one that's automatic. Because you get it wet, it's done. Get it manual. Anybody have any questions? I know I kind of went everywhere.
I got one for you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So you recommended live bait for everybody that's fishing this tournament, of course. I mean, the white bait's probably going to be your best bet, but if not, you're talking about the super fluke. What hook are you using with that weightless? Because I'm normally jig,
Right, I know you.
Jig head.
I usually weightless with a Texas-style worm rig.
Like a bass?
Like a bass hook,
like
yeah.
3-aught or 4-aught?
But 3-aught. That's my favorite bait because there's so many different ways you can work it. You could work it right on top, almost like a top water. You could work it mid-column, or you could work it very, very slow to where it's like a jerk, and then because it's acting like that dead bait or dying bait, then jerk it. My next bait probably would be a mirror lure, like a Mirrodine or a mirror minnow, matching what's out there. And the mirror minnow, the smaller, I think they've got smaller ones that match closer to. One of my other favorite baits is a Rapala, to be completely honest. I've caught some big trout on Rapalas, and hardly anybody uses Rapalas in saltwater, but I will use them all day long in saltwater. I've caught hundreds of trout on the husky jerks too. If you're fishing a little bit deeper water, jerk it, and let it pause, because when it sits there, and I've watched the trout do it, they'll come up, when it's sitting there, they'll look at it, and as soon as I jerk it, they hit it. That's another favorite bait of mine, is the husky jerks. Not the real big ones, but the smaller ones, because you're matching the hatch right now, because a lot of the bait that's around them is the glass minnows. You'll see during the wintertime, you'll see a lot of glass minnows on the flats and things like that. That's what they're keyed in on, because you don't have the pinfish on the flats, you don't have the white bait, but the white bait is, to them, that's protein. That's like, oh my God, I'm going to eat that. What was your question?
Do you find better luck with cut white bait or live white bait?
Live white bait, but we have caught some big trout on cut bait.
The reason why I say is because last year, Sean and I were pre-fishing for a tournament, and we got bored. So we caught some white bait, and we were sitting there, and for some reason it all died. And I don't know why it died in the middle of damn April, but it all died. So we just cut them. We were just cutting the tails and the heads off and throwing them out there on a popping cork, and I've never caught bigger trout.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've caught some big trout on actually cut ladyfish and lure fishing for redfish. The other thing I look for is major and minor salooner times. And I know some of you have heard me probably talk about this, but before I guided, I never paid attention to them. I just went out and fished when I could, and I do it today. I just go out and fish when I can now. I just go out and fish. I usually fish the entire day, but when I was guiding, the major and minor feeding times were really important to me, and some of you are old customers of mine, and they could vouch for this, that I would literally plan my trip around the salooners. I would plan, if I knew that I had a slow tide, I would make sure that we were on the water during either a major or minor feeding time during that slow tide period, because that's the only time they were going to eat. I picked up, I'll never forget, I picked up some clients for a guy that called me. I used to live in Lakeland. He called me and says, Todd, can you come take this trip? And I'm looking at the tides. I'm like, Jesus Christ, I would have never booked a trip on this. But I said, okay. Came out, picked up the clients. And I said to him, I said, look, this is the situation. We have a very slow incoming tide all day long. It was a 2-tide day. And I said, between 12:15 and 1:15 is when we're going to catch our fish. Other than that, they were locals and they wanted to learn a lot. So I said, other than that, we're not going to catch a lot of fish. Between 12:15 and 1:15 is when we caught every single one of our fish, because of that minor feeding time and that slow tide. And I know we've all experienced the really slow tides. Another instance, I had a trip where I had a husband and wife, and he called me up. He was from New York, and he had fished with me caught a ton of fish, and he says, I want to book you for 6 hours. I said, don't. Book me for 4. And he goes, why? And I said, because the tides are horrible. The best time is going to be at this time. I think the major feeding time was 4:15 to 6:15 in the evening. And he's like, oh, we want to do 6 hours. We just want to be on the water. Worst thing a guide wants to hear. Oh, we just want to be on the water, which is a lie, because you're paying them to go catch fish. Anyway, we get in the boat, and he finally just said, we're doing 6 hours. I said, fine. So after 4 hours on the boat and after 2 catfish, I can hear him up front with his wife saying, I swear to God, honey, we caught a ton of fish with them before. And I finally walked up front and I said, look, I said, we're not moving from this spot. I said, at 4:15, these fish are going to go off, but they're only going to eat for about an hour and a half, because we're going to lose the tide before we lose the major. And the wife's looking at me like I'm crazy. Literally, we never moved. we had caught one catfish in this spot in the last hour. As soon as 4:15 hit, both of them were doubled up. They caught over 65 trout between 18 and 24 inches. The wife quit. She says, I said, what are you doing? She goes, I'm done. I'm tired. I don't want to catch anymore. She goes, how in the world did you know that that was happening? And then I explained to her about the major feeding times. So if you're planning your trip and you know that you want to be in a specific area during a specific time, I highly recommend paying attention to the major and the minor feeding times correlating with the tides. If you can find a major or a minor in a spot that you know that you want to be at and you know the fish are going to be there, do it. Start kind of keeping logs about it, because it's really important with the tides and with the schooners. I would have clients call me and say, we want to go on this day, and I would say, no. I recommend that you, if you can, go on this day. I finally got my regular clients to the point to where they would look up the tides and solunar periods, and they would call me up and say, this is the day we want to go, just make sure that we're right. And I would look at the tides and schooners and said, perfect, let's do it. So it was a learning process with my regular clients, that they learned that we need to look at this time to go fishing and go with Todd and look at the tides and look at the schooners. So that's one thing that I highly recommend. I was kind of well known back in the day for that particular thing, was I would do a huge presentation about tides and schooners. That's all I would do. I've refined my speaking techniques or my seminars to simply talking about, because everybody can talk about trout, redfish, snook, live bait, artificial bait, but I wanted people to look at the more of the scientific end of things. And I didn't learn it until I actually guided and really paid attention and kept logs and knew exactly what we were doing when we were out there. That's why I was able to, go out and have successful days. Or I knew when we weren't going to have successful days. So, does anybody have any questions about that? Yes, sir.
What color do you like in plastic?
If it's real clear, I want to mimic more of like a white to a silver that mimics more of the bait fish. If it's a real dark colored water, I like real bright colors like chartreuse. And people think chartreuse, but chartreuse is a favorite color of the trout. Don't know why, but it is. It doesn't, to me, it doesn't match anything that's in the water. But chartreuse is a very popular color with trout. But if it's clear water like we usually have here, I usually tend to do like if I'm throwing a miradine, I try to mimic either a pinfish color or a whitebait color. Or if I'm using a Rapala, either gold and black on darker water or silver and black and clear water. So I like to keep it natural if it's real clear, because those fish are, they're weary as it is with that clear water. If it's dirtier, which trout, if you're fishing in an area, that's another key thing. If you're fishing in an area that has dirty water, trout usually do not like dirty water. They like that real clear water. But yeah, I usually like to stay with natural colors and clear water if I can. Anybody else?
What's the weight of your net you throw at the sky?
Oh, the skyway? Usually during this time of year, I'll throw a 10-foot 3/8 net with 1.5 pounds of lead per foot. If I can get away with it, I'll throw a 1/4-inch net with the same weight, even though it sinks slower. But if I'm doing that whole current thing where I'm behind the piling, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. But usually I like to throw a 10-foot, because usually the bait this time of year is bigger, so it really doesn't. I've learned one lesson though. I did a custom net one time, and I'll never do it again. I did 2 pounds per foot, and what happened was when you were at the skyway and you throw, and there's so much stuff on the bottom at the skyway, when you throw one that has 1.5 pounds of lead per foot, when you start to pull it, it will automatically really kind of close up pretty quick when you're on the bottom. But a 2 pound per foot net doesn't want to close very quickly on the bottom, and it scrapes the bottom as you're pulling it up. First time I threw that net, we barely got it back. I repaired it, threw it the next weekend, and literally we had tied it off to the cleat of the boat and tried to pull it up, and still wouldn't come up. So I literally had to cut it to get it off. So I learned that nothing heavier than usually 1.5 pounds per foot. Custom net was beautiful. Paid almost $80 for it, and threw it twice. I said, well, I'm never doing that again. But yeah, you can get away with throwing a 1/4 inch or 1/4 inch mesh, but I highly recommend a 3/8.
Anybody else have any more questions?
Yes.
So what do you keep in your journal or your log when you're
I keep temperature, air temperature, what the conditions were that day. If it was just after a front, if it was, or if it was a couple days after the front. One thing that I found too, being on the water, is that if we have fronts like this, and if you can get out during the time where it starts to warm up, it can be completely stupid on the water. But if you're going out after fronts, I've been out during fronts when they're coming in. I keep water temperature, air temperature, conditions of that day, salooner times, and then the tides, what they were doing that day. That's what I kept in my log. And now, I'm lucky enough as a recreational angler now that I can go out, like my buddy would call me and say, are we going to have a good day or what? And I could say, like on his birthday, I told him, I said, this was last November, I said, we're going to have a hell of a day today. Because we had a front that had gone through 3 days before. We went out there and we caught 112 fish between snook, redfish, and trout. Mostly of them were snook and redfish. And he was like, how did you know? I said, because it warmed up. We had good tides. We had south wind coming in. Yeah. So it's just a matter of keeping those logs and understanding what the conditions. Because it's hard for the average person to go out and consistently catch fish. I don't care who you are. The fish move, especially this time of year. They're moving, and I literally had to get my brain before we had these cold fronts. I literally were fishing springtime spots in the beginning of January that I would never even think about fishing at this time of year. But I had to recondition myself and say they're not in the wintertime spots, Todd. You've got to go and check the springtime spots. And sure enough, it was fish after fish. But now those fish should be in their winter spots. But that's what I kept along.
Any other questions? Thank you so much, bud. I appreciate it. David.
Yeah.
Come talk about this hill.